So today I want to talk about something that kind of piggybacks off of yesterday's video, but I don't feel like you have to have watched yesterday's video to get the full gist of this video. It's just kind of a companion piece. So if you happen to miss yesterday's video, in which I talked about Nintendo's strange obsession with promoting the Nintendo Switch 2 as a powerful system and why that could kind of bite them in the butt eventually, be sure to go check that out after watching this video. But some of the things that I talked about in that video definitely carry over to what we're going to talk about today, because the Nintendo Switch 2 has lots of technology in it that we haven't seen in previous Nintendo systems. Things like, of course, 120 frames per second support. Of course, it does have HDR, which is high dynamic range for things like colors and vibrant images and stuff like that. That is also in the Switch 2. Now, we know that Nintendo does constant updates for all of their platforms. If you've been around since, the 3DS, Wii U era, how much stability were these systems given? And it's definitely become kind of a trend for them. But it does seem like sometimes with system updates, there's some additional sauce. There's additional things that have changed that for whatever reason Nintendo never really talks about, and people have to find it on their own. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's video, because a major setting has been adjusted on the Nintendo Switch 2 that's going to give you better picture quality that was done in a recent Nintendo Switch 2 update that nobody picked up on until now. So what am I talking about? Well, it involves one of the things that I just mentioned, which is HDR. Now, if you know anything about HDR and the Nintendo Switch 2, kind of a mixed bag. There was a video that came out very early in the Nintendo Switch 2's system lifecycle from a channel called HD TV Test, which is basically a channel that just looks at HD televisions. They don't really do like gaming content, but they show you how things look on various televisions, what sort of settings to make, so on and so forth. And when they first got their hands on the Nintendo Switch 2, they noticed something. The HDR implementation wasn't all that great. And that's something that I've actually talked about in many reviews on my channel, where some games do have good HDR implementation, and some games, for whatever reason, just don't. Like a game like Metroid Prime 4 looks gorgeous with HDR turned on. But if you play a game like WWE 2K25, which is a great game, by the way, if you have HDR on, the image just looks ridiculously blown out, and the colors are way too saturated and stuff like that. And it definitely seemed like it was a case-by-case basis. Now, in this initial video, this person kind of breaks down how HDR works and how televisions intercept it and what sort of settings the Nintendo Switch 2 had that were making it for an incompatible experience when trying to dial in the HDR to get the best image quality available on your television. And it seemed like something that could either be fixed eventually or would just be left to the sands of time. But like I said, we actually have a big update on this, and now it's good. It's good stuff here. So here is the latest video that has gone up from HD TV Test. I'll have a link to it in the description box down below, so make sure you guys go check that out. But basically, this individual has data, can actually, see different things and see how the adjustments are doing for changing things. And initially, it was not good. The increments that you were going up were not in good enough increments to make it so that you could really dial in the picture. It was done with variables. Whereas now, it is actually, this is a sponsored segment, but, get your money, Playboy. I got no problem with it. Now you can see, the charts are much more across the board. They break it down into, all sorts of stuff. It's stuff that it just flies beyond my head. But they do give you some basic outlines and basic settings of how to sort of dial in the HD TV or the HDR image on your HD television to get a much better image quality. And this is via a system update that was done. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, well, wait a minute. Why wouldn't you have talked about that? That seems like something that should be mentioned, especially going back to yesterday's video, when you're on like this big power kick and stuff like that, when you're talking about things like HDR being implemented on your system, this should be something that you're mentioning to the consumers, not something that the consumers have to find out like on their own by actually going in and messing around with the settings. Because think about it from this perspective. When you get your system, you get your Switch 2, you're going to set up the system, right? You're probably going to do that one time. You know, you're probably not going to constantly go in and adjust your HDR settings and adjust, you know, what sort of output you want and stuff like that. Do you want compatible software to use HDR, or do you want all software, or do you want no software? It's kind of a one and done thing. But if you're making a substantial change into how people can dial it in and making, I mean, the most important thing here is it's making for a better experience when you're dialing in the HDR stuff. Why wouldn't you mention that in the system update? And then that gets me thinking about other things like, well, the system has DLSS in it. Once again, another thing that Nintendo themselves have talked about when they're talking about the power of the Nintendo Switch 2. DLSS can be updated. Like, NVIDIA can do different things and force different updates for the DLSS to make games look and potentially run better. Would that be something that completely goes by the wayside as well? Like, I guess I just don't understand it, because Nintendo will tell you when they fixed backwards compatibility issues for Switch 1 games on the Switch 2. It seems like every couple of weeks or so, you get a whole new list of games that had maybe some little graphical issues or some sort of issues here and there that now work fine on the Nintendo Switch 2. They literally just did one a couple of days ago, including games like Resident Evil 4 on the Switch 1 that now run better on the Nintendo Switch 2. So you can talk about that, but you can't talk about adjusting a major setting that people are going to want to mess around with and dial in and potentially have a better experience now. Because now I might be able to use HDR on WWE 2K25, and it might actually look good. So I'm going to play around with these settings and see if I can get a better image quality. And I highly recommend that if you own a Nintendo Switch 2 and you have a television that has HDR support, I recommend you watch HD TV's tests video and like try it for yourself, because obviously every TV is different. You know, every TV has different sorts of settings and stuff like that, has different, you know, peaks for the HDR and lows for the HDR. So it's going to come down to the individual themselves. But I don't know. This whole thing just seems strange, that like you do a significant change to the system. You do something that's going to make games look better. Not run better, but look better on HD televisions, you know, all blown up and stuff like that. And you don't even mention it, but you mention all the power stuff. So go watch yesterday's video talking about the power situation with the Switch 2, because I don't know, I find that whole thing very, very interesting. And let me know what you think about this in the comments section down below. Did you know about this? Because I sure as hell didn't know about this. And I feel like if I don't know about something, then probably a lot of people don't know about it. And if a lot of people don't know about it, you know, people need to know about it. So check the HDR settings on your Nintendo Switch 2. Use HD TV test guide as well in order to dial it in as good as you can do it. And let me know your results in the comments section down below. And I guess if you don't own a HDR compatible television, like, hey, you know what? Thank you for watching all the way to the end of this video. I'll give you something special. Lenny Kravitz sucks. I'm tired of Kravitz. You had a great song with "Are You Gonna Go My Way," and then you made butt rock for middle-aged white women in the early 2000s. All of my life, where have you been? That song sucked. All right. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. Be sure to share this video with your friends and enemies. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.